Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight we'll be joined by Vanessa Maria Graber. Lance Haver will preview the upcoming SEPTA and Water Department hearings, and Denise Clay Murray and I will discuss the significance of the ballot drawing here in Philadelphia today. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. Back from a vacation in Canada, where I learned that one of the number one cash crops in all of Quebec is maple syrup.
Yes, and there's a whole, not to get too far off topic, but there's a whole story about like illegal maple syrup runners and things like that. It's amazing. It's amazing.
They told us the story of someone who took out the maple syrup from the barrels and put in water. Took them 5 years to get caught.
Yeah. It's a whole thing up there. There's a whole underground economy around it. And Denise Clay Murray is here with us. Denise.
Hi.
How are you?
Hey, Denise.
I'm good. How are you? I'm dying to hear about this underground railroad of maple syrup.
Oh, I wouldn't call it an underground railroad. I'd call it more of a almost like a maple syrup mafia is what we're talking about. Yeah, it's very interesting.
They took it very seriously. And I got made more important because I grew up near a farm that was a sugar shack. And when I told them that, they were very impressed. And as far as I can figure out, the only thing I did that was impressive was I lived near something. But the fact that I knew what a sugar shack was amazing to them.
Well, sometimes that's all it takes.
Well, our neighbors to the north. Well, so Lance, let's get started here talking about something that's really important. We have two major sets of hearings coming up. So what do we got coming up here?
So the first is a hearing on the water rates. And the second is SEPTA didn't do what they promised City Council they were going to do, which is meet with groups, establish stakeholder meetings, and then redo the plan. The consultants decided to bypass all the community meetings, redo the plan in private, and they're going to be announcing it Monday the 20th, what the changes are. And supposedly we're going to be able to ask questions. I don't see how that's going to be possible with the amount of interest there is, but we'll see. I wanted to first, though, focus on the water rate hearings because this is going to be the only opportunity for the public to be heard on this issue. And it's a very large rate increase. And I'm trying to pull up the slideshow now, and I'm not having some luck. But let me talk about, here we go. So the rate increase is 21.8%. And that means that the Water Department is requesting annual revenues in fiscal year 2024, which is this next year, and fiscal year 2025. This is despite the fact that the Water Department just received $500 million from the federal government, despite the fact that City Council stated in a written letter, which Hall Monitor has a copy of, and much to my surprise, the Water Rate Department, the Water Commissioner, didn't share it with the Water Rate Board. So even though we have a copy of it, I was told yesterday that the people who are responsible for setting rates hadn't seen the letter and didn't know anything about it. And the fourth thing that I found incredible was in the filing, the Philadelphia Water Department states that they have not done anything to try and save money. What they've done is only relied on budgets. No discussions about cost savings from making their services more efficient, combining services with PGW, or doing anything else. So the public's going to have an opportunity to talk about what a rate increase is going to mean. And here you see what the proposed difference in the bills are. Currently, the average bill is $69.31. That's going to go up to $83.92. And that's the average. And it's really hard to talk about the average because one of the strange things about utility service is the tendency for the people who are better off to buy the most efficient appliances, to have the most effective ways of saving money. And for middle income and for working poor who don't get the benefit of any of the programs, for them to actually have on a per person usage a higher rate. because a high efficiency furnace or a low water flush toilet are all things that require an initial investment of a substantial amount of money. And for many people who are struggling, the only thing that they can do when their heater breaks or when their toilet breaks is replace it with what they can afford. And that's not going to be something that's going to be as energy efficient as what somebody who has some resources can do. So it's a little bit surprising, I think, for most people to find out that the wealthier you are, there's a greater ability to save money on energy efficient appliances and devices. And typically your costs will be lower than for the working poor. So when the water department files for the rate increase, they file with the Philadelphia Water Rate Board. Those are the people who set the rates. And those people then put up on their webpage, which is how they believe to talk to the world and how they communicate with the world, they put up a notice. And here's a copy of their notice. And the reason why I'm putting it up is because it, not for what it says, but for what it doesn't say. So the notice is of a water rate public hearings on the proposed rate increase. It doesn't say how much. It doesn't say that it's not for 1 year, but it's for 2 years. And it doesn't tell people that if the increase goes through, it's going to be twice the high inflation rate, which is coming down. It's going to be over 21%. And that's a little surprising for the Philadelphia Water Rate and Sewer Board, which is supposed to be representing the public, which is supposed to be seeking public input, for them not to tell the public how large the rate increase is. Now, here I am putting up what you have to do to be able to testify at the hearings. But the timing of the hearings itself is a little unusual. What happens in a rate case is the water department files and says, here's why we need more money. And then there's a period of discovery. I disclose and I say now that I am a participant in these proceedings. The only way that I can get information to report on is if I become a party to the proceedings and I file what's called pro se. I represent myself. So the only way I get the information about what's going on is becoming a participant. So that process has just started. The water department files for the rate increase, and then we have months to investigate, to send discovery requests, and then there'll be technical hearings where we'll get a chance to cross-examine the witnesses. And during that 2-month period, all the facts of the rate increase are going to come out. Why the water department says they need a rate increase. Let me give you a concrete example. Last year, the water department said they needed an additional $14 million from the city to make ends meet. During the course of the hearings, I'm going to be allowed to ask, well, why did you only ask for $14 million? If you knew you had a tremendous amount that you needed to avoid a rate increase, why didn't you ask for $50 million? Why did you only ask for $14 million? Well, we don't know the answer to that yet. But the Water Rate Board, along with the water department, and along with the agreement of the Community Legal Services, which has been appointed to be the legal representative of the Water Rate Board, but which calls itself the public advocate, have agreed to hold these hearings before the facts are known. So even though I think it's very important for people who are concerned to show up and be heard, it's important to note that there's really very little anyone can say about it other than, I don't want a rate increase. And what that means is people's testimony can't be as powerful as if they had the information, as if they could point to the fact and say, here's an example of what the water department did. They spent money redecorating their offices. They just went ahead and put in new meters, where they hired a company from Georgia to make the arrangements to install the meters. And those new meters cost literally millions of dollars and save almost nothing. So none of those facts have come out yet because the hearings have just started and there hasn't been an opportunity to develop those facts. So forcing people to testify before the facts come out, before the stories are written in the news media, before Hall Monitor gets a chance to report on the facts, makes it very difficult for people to testify. Second thing that's of importance is the Water Rate Board, with the agreement of Community Legal Services, has decided to do the hearings virtually. So that means that you have to have access to a computer or a phone, access to the internet, and be culturally comfortable with using Zoom as a way of communicating. It also means that dissent is hidden. If these were public hearings where people could attend in public, people would bring signs, people would show up, people might chant, they might complain, they might do any number of things to make sure that their objection to raising the water rates to be as high as the electric bills is heard. The Water Rate Board and the Water Department, along with Community Legal Services, has shut out that type of public dissent and tried to force everybody to use the Zoom meeting. And there's absolutely no reason at this point to use the Zoom meeting. City Council is meeting in public. The school district, the school board's meeting in public. Everybody else is meeting in public. The only reason to do this privately is for the convenience of the Water Rate Board, the Water Department, and Community Legal Services to shut out the dissent, to stop people from showing up and being heard in person. Still, with all those things being said, anyone who would like to testify and like to be heard, I encourage you to do so. You do have to go to the webpage. There's no other way to sign up for it. And for some bizarre reason, the Water Rate Board is asking you to sign up earlier than when the hearings are. Can't tell you why. That's just the way it is. So there's hearings, on the March 22nd at 3 o'clock and March 22nd at 6 o'clock. If you read through the notice, you'll see they're only allowing a half an hour for the hearings. I've been assured that if more people show up, people will be given the time necessary. But they haven't said how long people will have to testify. They haven't said who will be allowed to make opening statements. And they haven't said what kind of fact sheet's going to be available for the public to understand it. By the way, the Water Department did come up with an entire presentation for City Council explaining why they need the water rate case. And again, until I objected to that not being posted, it wasn't posted. But the Water Department isn't sharing that information with the public, so people don't get a chance to see exactly how bad it is. So hearing on the following day, the 23rd, again, 3 o'clock to 3:30, 6 o'clock to 6:30, half an hour. The assurance is that if people show up, people will get heard, but that's the difficulty. We can't show up with our signs. We can't show up to protest. When I talk about the Philadelphia Water Department's failure to look for cost savings, I want to read from their filing. Again, when the Water Department asks for a rate increase, they file paperwork and they say what they're doing. So this is a direct quote from their filing. Cost control at PWD, the Philadelphia Water Department, starts with budgeting. PWD has a vigorous budget process through which all program managers submit and justify their budget to senior management. During the year, PWD Finance produces monthly budget monitoring reports that evaluate budget performance. It's very clear that the Water Department doesn't look for cost savings in operations. They don't look at what they can do with other city departments. They don't look what they can do with PGW. They don't look at what they can do with other municipally owned water utilities to save money. Their focus is on the budget process. And what that means, of course, is that the real savings, the savings of efficiencies of service, are not looked at and they're not included in this rate filing. The difficult part for many people to understand, and I'm going to do my best to explain it, is how much this rate increase is being driven not by the needs for the Water Department, but by the demands of the bond raters. So here's what happens. Utilities like Philadelphia Water Department, Philadelphia Gas Works, or PECO borrow money to make repairs and to build infrastructure. And the reason for that is we use the pipes, the wires, for a long period of time, 20 to 50 years. So to pay for them over those 20 to 50 years life of the infrastructure, the utility borrows money and then pays the money back over the years plus interest. To make the bondholders happy, the Water Department agrees to collect more than what they have to, and that's called a coverage ratio. So if the Water Department borrows $1 million, they promise to collect $1,200,000 so that the bondholders are assured that they'll get their money back. But even that's not enough for the bondholders this year. The bondholders are demanding, even though what's called the bond covenant, which is the legal document for the bonds, states that the water department only has to collect 1.2 times what they borrowed, meaning for every million they have to collect 1,200,000. The bond rating agencies are saying that's not enough. They want them to raise our rates. So the bond rating agencies see 1.3 coverage. And here's the quote. Moody's, while acknowledging certain short-term coverage and reserve balance deficiency, is stating that the current rating and outlook are predicated on achieving planned debt service coverages 1.3 times, not simply the bond covenant requirement of 1.2. This underlies how important a public bank would be to water consumers. If there was a public bank and the water department could borrow our own money for ourselves, we wouldn't need a coverage ratio. We would be able to reduce water rates overnight. And that's, again, why it's so upsetting that CLS refuses to ask about the public bank and how much it would save consumers. But we can see clearly from the water department's filing, they're more concerned with how Moody's, which is someone who rates bonds and says how much interest is going to be charged on the bond, how Moody's looks at rates rather than how consumers look at rates. And again, while the hearings come out, we're going to be able to look at that and see that very clearly. Now, in the past, many people would believe that the public advocate should be representing us. And what we found out in the last rate case is the public advocate doesn't represent the public. They don't have a client relationship with the public. They're hired to be a technical expert to the Philadelphia Water Rate Board, the people who set the rates. But it goes well beyond that. I have asked Community Legal Services to disclose if any of the board members of CLS have any interest. Either legally they represent the companies, or they do business with the companies, or they own stock in the companies that do business with the Philadelphia Water Department. CLS has objected to that and is refusing to supply that information. So I don't have good data or good information on every one of the board members of Community Legal Services. But let me just point out, the president of Community Legal Services, Jason A. Leckerman, he's a partner at Ballard Spahr, which is a major law firm in the city of Philadelphia. From Ballard Spahr's own webpage, quote, our clients span the industry. We represent producers and distributors of power and renewable energy, as well as underwriters, private insurers, banks, and other institutions who invest in energy assets. Philadelphia Water Department buys its power, its electricity, instead of developing it on its own, like what the Portland, Oregon Water Department does, where it uses the outflow of water to generate its own electricity. Philadelphia Water Department has decided over the years not to do that and instead buy power from private power makers like PECO. And one of the things that's going to come out is exactly how much money Philadelphia Water Department pays PECO for electrical generation. That's completely unnecessary when the water department could generate its own electricity. CLS won't challenge that. And they will not acknowledge that one of the reasons that we could ask about is, does the president of CLS, who represents private profit-making utility companies, have a conflict of interest? We can't even get CLS to tell us how they make decisions about what positions to take in the rate case. So that's why it becomes critically important for people to show up at the hearings and to be heard and to join with Philadelphia City Council in imposing a rate increase. There are alternatives, there are other solutions, but none of that's going to happen without a public outcry. We can't trust CLS to represent our interests. They clearly state that they don't represent our interests. They clearly state that they've been hired by the Water Rate Board to be the Water Rate Board's legal advisor, and say they don't have a client relationship with the public. So the public has to, if we want to stop the rate increase, the public has to stand up on its own. The other issue that's come up is the SEPTA. And SEPTA's got an upcoming event that they call the Transit Talk. And this Transit Talk is Monday, this coming Monday, the 20th, from 6:30 to 7:30. As I spoke about in the beginning, SEPTA promised City Council during the hearing that they were going to meet with groups, that they were going to do better outreach, that they were going to hold stakeholder meetings and revise the plan. Well, they reneged on all those promises. They went behind closed doors, and they've come up with still another draft of their quote unquote bus revolution. And this Monday, the 20th, they're going to tell us what the new plan is. And what they're saying is that they're going to let us ask questions. They say respond to questions. But if you think about it for more than 2 seconds, how is it possible? There's 500,000 SEPTA riders. They're going to hold the transit talk meeting from 6:30 to 7:30. How can they possibly respond to questions? If it takes 45 minutes for them to explain what the new bus routes are going to be, and again, to be perfectly honest, it's going to be very hard for most of us to follow what it means because they gave all new names to all the routes. So you might be interested in what's happening to your route, the 27 or the 4 or the 45. But when SEPTA's consultants talk about it, they're not going to call those buses by the numbers you're familiar with. They're going to call them by their numbers, 503, 402, whatever number they're randomly assigning. They say those are placeholder numbers. So it will take at least 10 minutes for people to figure out what the hell SEPTA's consultants are talking about. And then they say we can ask questions. So the reality is what they're going to do is force riders to once again be in opposition to the changes because we weren't asked for feedback before they came up with the plan. We're asking now to criticize the plan they've come up to without us. That being said, it's important for people who are concerned, who are worried about losing their bus routes, to get online and hear what SEPTA is saying. Now, SEPTA does say that they've gotten a few thousand comments. And I recognize that sounds like a lot of people until you consider there are 500,000 SEPTA riders. So if they get 3,000 comments, that's less than 0.5%. And we know that it's very difficult to do outreach. We know it's very hard to figure out what 500,000 people think. That should not be an excuse to not try. The fact that it's difficult, the fact that it's hard to do, should mean that we strive even harder, not less. We shouldn't give up. We shouldn't say, well, there's really no way to know what everyone thinks, so we're not going to bother to ask anyone what they think. What we should say is it's really difficult to figure out how to talk to 500,000 people, but we're going to do the best we can. People who are concerned about losing their buses, concerned about how they're going to visit family and friends, concerned about how their students are going to get to school, please sign up, get to the quote unquote transit talk and hear what's happening, and then make sure your city council person knows of your concerns. And that's my report for the evening. Again, 2 important things. The water rate case, our only opportunity to be heard, even though it's before the facts are out, people can still show up and say, I'm opposed to a rate increase. And then that's Wednesday and Thursday of this coming week. Monday night is the SEPTA transit talk. That's our chance to hear what's going to happen to our bus lines.
I have a question, Lance. The water department actually said that it was not trying to find any other means to save money before they asked for this increase?
So what they say is they've looked at their budget. In direct response to a question, what have you done to try and curtail costs? They say we've looked at our budgets. They did not say we looked at our operations. They did not say we looked at how we can bring in other industry. They did not say we looked at how we combine services with the city, PGW, or other municipally owned water departments. I'm asking that question directly in the exact direct way that you've asked it. And unfortunately, we won't have an answer before the hearings. What we have to do is take it from what they say. They say, here's what we did to contain costs. We looked at our budget. Now, I would think, and I think most people would think if they did other things, they would like to brag on it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you do hard work, if you really struggle, if you did everything you could, and you're sorry, but this is the best that you could do, you'd think that the water department would brag about it, saying, here's all the steps we took. We met with PGW. We met with the other water utilities. We combined buying power with every municipal utility in the state so we could keep the cost of chemicals down. We went out and we tried to recruit businesses that use water in their process to come to the city. so that we'd have more people buying water. Here's all the things we tried, and none of it worked. What they said is we asked City Council for 14 million, only 14 million, and they gave it to us. Not that we asked them for 100 million and they only gave us 14 million. We asked for 14 million, they gave us 14 million. So we still need the rate increase because they didn't give us more than what we asked for. What a shock there. And two, we've looked at our budgets and our budgets seem right to us. So there's nothing we can do about it. This is the difficult part of municipally owned utility and rate settings. Because there's nothing to do other than raise rates after they make a mistake, we are stuck in a very awkward position. We don't have an aggressive advocate who's fighting for us before the mistakes are made. So after the water department doesn't have cost savings, puts in meters that don't save us money, has services that jacks up our prices, then they come to us and say, well, what should we do? We've already wasted $50 million. We don't have any place to get the money from other than you. And the people we owe the money to, our bondholders, are saying they want us to collect even more. So what can we do other than raise your rates? And that's the difficult situation. And that's why the type of regulation we're currently using is so painful for ratepayers, because they're not stopped from making mistakes. They're not required to have cost savings. They're not required to be efficient, because every single mistake they made, they get to pass that along.
Yeah.
And it is enraging. I don't mean to be quite so emotional about it, but water is the basic necessity. You can't, in Philadelphia, we don't allow you to live in a house that doesn't have water. In Philadelphia, if you're a family and your water's turned off, we take your children away from you. We believe that this is fundamental. And yes, we have some good low-income plans, but not enough people are on them because the water department doesn't sign people up. And again, that's going to come out at the hearings. There was a state program to give grants up to $3,000 for people who are behind in their bills. We're going to see during the course of the hearings that the water department failed to get 25% of the people who could have benefited from it to benefit from it. So if there were 100,000 people who could have benefited from it, the water department got less than 20,000. And that's a loss for all of us, for the families who didn't get the help, and for the rest of us who are now going to have to pay higher bills because that money would have come in and made the rate increase less necessary.
Every time we talk about this, it gets worse.
Well,
there are more problems, more things that weren't done.
I'm hoping when we have a new mayor, someone who's more concerned with the working poor, somebody who's going to actually understand what it's like if you're working at CVS or you're working at a job that pays $30,000 a year, how hard it is to make ends meet and really care about these basic necessities of life. Right now, unfortunately, we have a mayor who lets the water department get away with whatever it wants.
All right, well, Lance, thank you so much for that. We're going to look forward to updates as these meetings commence next week and the week after. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Right now, we're going to run a report that our contributor, Vanessa Maria Graber, sent in. So here is Vanessa Maria Graber.
Hello, it's Vanessa Maria Graber reporting for Hall Monitor with a roundup of what's happening with Philly elections. In case you missed it, more than 90 candidates filed nomination petitions last week in Philadelphia with the Board of Elections to run for mayor, city council, and other citywide offices like sheriff, city controller, and register of wills. Those nominations are collected by volunteers, paid canvassers, or campaign staffers. And what they do is they go all around the city, if it's a citywide office or within a district, to knock on doors and talk to registered voters. Now, if you're running as a Democrat, you have to get registered Democratic voters. If you're running as a Republican, you have to get registered Republicans. Now, an additional 28 people filed petitions in Harrisburg to become candidates for judge, because we also have judge races this election season. And so what happens is, after those petitions are filed, There is 1 week for the public to be able to review those petitions and ascertain whether or not they're valid. And so on Tuesday, that was the deadline for members of the public. They usually are residents from the district, voters who have reviewed the petitions and then file something within the Board of Elections and the courts to challenge those petitions. Now, for citywide offices, you need 1,000 petitions, and they all have to be legitimate. So many candidates get 2 or 3 times the number of petitions. We saw with Rebecca Reinhart, she got 10,000 petitions, and she only needed 1,000. Similarly, with mayoral candidate Sherelle Parker, their campaign also collected 5,000 signatures. Now, if you're running for a district office like city council, you only need 750 petitions. Again, it is a good idea to get 2 or 3 times the number of petitions in case a challenge is filed. And so challenges are filed by voters, but they tend to be affiliated with an opponent. They don't have to be. Really, anybody can file one, but usually they're friends of a campaign. What we saw on Tuesday is that only one mayoral candidate is being challenged, and that is Amin Brown. Not surprising, given his past history with lawsuits and other allegations around his finances. 11 of the 29 Democratic candidates for city council at large will have to, respond to the challenges. And then 17 out of 26 candidates for council's 10 district seats, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer. Shout out to them for collecting all this information. What does that mean? Well, what happens usually is a document is filed in court and it gives the legal basis for the challenges. And so when you look at the documents, you can see the names of the voters, or if it's just one voter, and the name of the candidate they're challenging and the reasons why they're challenging. Now, if they're going to take it to the Board of Elections and have a hearing in court, usually it's because most of the signatures are not valid and it's below the legal threshold. So let's take, for example, Rebecca Reinhart. She has 10,000 petitions. Say 2,000 of them a voter reviewed were not valid. It's unlikely that petition would be filed with the Board of Elections because they're still way over the legal threshold of 1,000. Now, when you look at some of these other challenges and you see that maybe over 3,000 signatures were collected, but then when they did a review, they found only 500 were valid and you need 750, that's when you would want to file the challenge. It happens when they don't meet the legal threshold for petitions. And so what happens during that process? Well, usually it's a bunch of volunteers or people, like I said, affiliated with the campaign who get a copy of the petition signatures and they come on sheets, right? And each sheet is numbered. So they go line by line through each name. And what you have to put on the petition is your printed name, your signature, your address, and the date. And so all of those things have to be correct. So where it says printed, it actually has to be printed. You can't have a signature. Similarly, where it says signature, you can't have it printed. It has to have the correct date on it, the correct address, and the address has to be complete. If you're missing an apartment number or some other element of the address, or you get the zip code wrong, that can be invalidated. And so those are the types of mistakes that people are looking for. Now, when you go door to door and you are collecting those signatures, you have to be a registered voter in Philadelphia. And so if somebody is not a registered voter or they're not from Philadelphia, they're called, and those people are called circulators. The circulator can be marked as ineligible, in which case that invalidates the signatures that they're collecting. So you want to make sure your volunteers or your paid canvassers are actually registered to vote in the city of Philadelphia, and that information is accessible. Otherwise, the circulator will get invalidated. Other things that we see problems with are just missing information, ineligible writing, and also sometimes you see that the handwriting appears to be by the same exact person. It's really unlikely that you would go door to door in a neighborhood and get the same exact type of handwriting from a variety of people. So if you see a sheet that looks like it's in the same exact writing, that's going to send a red flag to somebody who's reviewing those petitions. And so those are the kinds of things that you would see in a petition challenge and what will be disputed in court. And so many of these court dates are coming up throughout the week. And what happens is a candidate has the ability to challenge those claims made against them. So maybe you have a circulator that is in fact registered, and they're saying that they're not. You go to court, you could prove that circulator is in fact registered to vote. A lot of times, one of the biggest challenges we see is the circulators are doing a good job collecting the signatures, but the people are maybe not registered voters. You have to be a registered voter. It has to be up to date. Your address has to be correct. You can't be registered to vote at another address and you put someone else's address, or maybe you didn't update your registration. All those things have to match and line up. And when they don't, those petitions get invalidated. And so one of the things you look for are a lot of trends, right, and patterns in the data. If you're seeing that the majority of people are not registered to vote, it begs the question, what information, what database are you using to knock on doors and find the registered voters? If you're using old information, that can ruin all of your sheets. And so again, there's a lot of factors at play when it comes to collecting petitions. And then a number of things can happen. Two opponents, right? Like they could come to court, both challenging each other's signatures, and they can actually negotiate and drop the challenge against each other. And that has happened where you come to terms and you say, you know what, I'm going to drop my challenge against you. You drop your challenge against me. And they get the voters who are the ones who are actually challenging to do that. Or you might hold to your claim and say, no, these petition signatures are not valid, and you're going to do your best to win in court. Ultimately, a judge decides. So in some of these races, all the candidates can get invalidated, and then we'd have to have a write-in campaign. Or the judge could uphold the signatures and say, actually, these signatures are valid and the person has enough to get on the ballot. So we'll have to wait and see how this all unfolds in the next week and see who actually makes the ballot. Not so sure about Amin Brown. We'll see. But if he gets kicked off the ballot as a mayoral campaign candidate, that will be a really big deal. We definitely expect a lot of the at-large candidates, there's 29 of them, at least some of them are not going to make the ballot. And again, with the district council seats, we'll also have to wait and see. So lastly, I'll end with a mayoral forum that was held yesterday at Gloria Cáceres Middle School in Kensington, which is in District 7. 11 candidates, or I believe 12 of the candidates came out to the forum where they were questioned by elementary school kids. And so we had Warren Bloom, Almond Brown, Alan Dom, Derek Green, Helen Gim, David O, Sherelle Parker, Rebecca Reinhart, and Maria Quinones Sanchez. They were all there contributing to the discussion. There was a lot of things that were said. Most of the things about education and school that we have heard before, nothing new, but I do want to end on something funny that was said. And that was with one of the candidates talking to children, of course, saying that there is no Santa Claus. What, you might ask? Well, yes, Warren Bloom, a Black captain who's running for mayoral candidate, he told the students to repeat his campaign slogan. He said, "Vote for Bloom in the spring. Let's do it right. I'm from the hood. I'll do you good." And then he went on to say, "There's no Santa Claus. You can't put your faith and hope in politicians." That was probably the funniest thing that was said throughout the evening. And again, when you have a group of kids, you really wonder what the point was of that. But anyway, that is your election roundup for the week. I'm Vanessa Graber reporting for Hall Monitor. Thanks.
Wow.
Thank you, Vanessa Maria Graber, for that report. You got to know your audience in politics, and
I'm
sometimes
come right out and say it.
Yeah.
Warren Bloom has been one of the more interesting candidates in this mayor's race.
It's almost like when former President Trump was talking to that kid on the phone and he said, "Do you still believe in Santa Claus? Because at your age, it's borderline, right?" That's what that is. That's what Warren Bloom did.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I the whole time when she said that, I was like, okay, did you get it out of your system? You know?
I don't know. Well, listen. Maybe that message will resonate. So anyway, that segues perfectly into what you and I were in attendance at today, Denise. So what did we do today?
We visited the single most important coffee can in the entire city of Philadelphia, the Horn and Hard Art can that has the marbles in it that determine ballot position for the primary. Now, Philadelphia is a city of neighborhoods and rather arcane traditions, no more arcane than this.
Allison, can we bring that up, the video of that up, please?
Mhm.
So this is what you're talking about. We took some video today just to show people what we're talking about. This was in the mayor's reception room. And this is what the process kind of looks like. And this is the mayoral drawing. Now, we don't have audio here, so we'll talk over it. But this is what it looks like when there's former Councilmember Derek Green choosing his ballot position.
Yes.
And then it's announced.
Now, for candidates that are in like large races, like city council at large, these little ping pong balls or marbles, or I think they're marbles, can mean the difference between staying in the race and dropping out of the race. Because there are so many people, your ballot position becomes very important. It was kind of the same thing with the mayor's race this year, too, because you have so many candidates. Where you end up on the ballot becomes important, especially if you don't have a lot of money and you don't have a lot of name recognition. For example, the person who drew the first ballot position for the mayor's race is a gentleman named John Wood, who, from what I understand, is a former police officer who was running for mayor. Now, he is position 1 on the ballot. There goes Warren Bloom. And but no one knows who he is. In fact, when he came up to pick his ping pong ball out of the Horn and Hard Art can, folks were like, who?
And so people know what happened here. I'm going to read the ballot position for the mayoral candidates. Number 1, John Wood. Number 2, Sherelle Parker. Number 3, James DeLeon. Number 4, Rebecca Reinhart. Number 5, Dulcia Gray. Number 6, Derek Green. Number 7, Amon Brown. Number 8, Jeff Brown. And I think that could be a problem right there. I'll explain why in a second. Number 9, Maria Cunha Sanchez. Number 10, Warren Bloom. Number 11, Alan Dom. And number 12, Helen Gim. The reason I say Amon Brown and Jeff Brown could be a problem for each other because they're right next to each other. And I just think that could be that could be confusing to people.
It can.
And one of the things that when we talk about ballot position, if it's a big race, like city council at large, where there are 29 candidates right now, my suspicion is it won't be 29 candidates on election day. I could be wrong about that. For that race where there are 2 open seats, maybe it doesn't matter as much, or 2 open seats on the Democratic ticket. It could mean that if you get a better ballot position, you get a little bump in the polls, and that's enough to take you over the top. All right. In the mayor's race, though, I'm a little less certain it's as big a deal, because I think what we would call the well-known candidates are well-known,
Mhm.
and they have their constituencies. There are some undecided voters out there still, and I think in a race like this that makes sense because you have so many different, candidates who have different, maybe similar ideologies, but different areas on which they intend to focus. Do you think, let's take Helen Gim, for instance, at number 12, and let's be honest, she's a front runner in this race. Does that number 12 position mean she's going to get fewer votes than she would if she was 1, 2, 3, something like that?
I'm not 100% sure about that. The reason why I'm not 100% sure about that is because she has name recognition and she has money. And when you have name recognition and money, especially money, you can put your ballot position on flyers that you can put literally everywhere. And I think that's probably what she's going to end up doing. Now, she's number 12 now.
Yeah.
That she may end up rising depending on who gets knocked off. She probably won't, I don't know if that number will change, but she's 12 now. It's going to be interesting to see, because you mentioned Jeff Brown and Almond Brown being right next to each other. As Vanessa pointed out in her report, Almond Brown is being challenged. If he doesn't win that challenge, that means there's only one Brown, and that makes
Yeah.
things better for Jeff Brown. But
Mhm.
it's going to be interesting to see how many of these folks that do have money, like Alan Dom is only number 11. He's one above Gim. So you have two people that have access to resources that can basically flood the zone with their ballot positions. Now, I'm interested, first of all, if I'm Sherelle Parker, I'm having Marion Tasco pick everything for me from here on out in this race, because Marion Tasco is the person who picked Sherelle Parker's ballot position from the Horn and Hard Art can, and she got number 2. So if I'm Sherelle Parker, I'm saying to hey, Marion Tasco, can you pick everything for me, because you are obviously
I'd like to ask Marion Tasco for lottery number suggestion.
hello.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with you. I do think it's going to be a little more condensed when we get into May, and I don't know, for this race particularly, it matters a lot. The other thing that you have to take into consideration, we won't know for a little while yet, is what the ballot will actually look like.
Right.
So if you're number 6, let's say, of a 12-person field, being number 6 doesn't necessarily mean you're on the bottom. It could mean you're over here. It could be 1, 2, 3 across. And that makes it different too.
Right.
So actually being number 7 would be the second one you might see if you're reading down, which could be a benefit. There's all kinds of different ways this could shake out, and we won't know that right away.
No, because we're probably not going to see the ballot until it's time to vote. Or we might get a chance to see it before then. Hopefully the commissioners will let us get a look at it, but we may not be able to see it before then. I'm kind of the thing that kind of, and I don't know if you caught this, but the thing that kind of struck me was in the city council at large races. If you're an incumbent, you did not have a good day.
So one of the things that was really interesting about that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seemed to me like the first 10 candidates who went up to draw either got a number in the 20s or the high teens.
Yes.
I don't think anybody walked away with a good number in those first 10 pools.
No.
And just to give you an example here, Councilmember Isaiah Thomas is last, number 29. Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson is number 25. And Councilmember Jimmy Harity is number 18. Now, again, depending on how the ballot's set up, it could mean, it could be different. It could mean something different when we get closer to the election. And again, I don't know that all. My suspicion is there won't be 29 candidates when we get to May. But the other thing I just want to mention about that too, Councilmember Derek Green, who's now running for mayor, he had a very poor ballot position last time around, and he won.
Right.
The incumbency can negate some of the damage that may be done by a poor number.
Right. And again, it becomes a function of resources. Like not too long after I got home and I went in my email box here at here where I am, I got a fundraising letter from Catherine Gilmore Richardson asking for like a $25 contribution so that she can, expand her message to voters. And you're going to be getting a lot of those from city council candidates, except for the ones that already have a bunch of money. And the thing is, for an Isaiah Thomas who's at number 29, he may be number 29, but he's got the backing of 1199C, the Healthcare Workers Union. So it may not hurt him all that much. And just like with the mayor's race, you're going to get some clean out when the petition challenge hearings are held tomorrow. So what may be 18, 19, or 29 today could be a lot higher tomorrow. And, there were a couple of people that have, run before, like Sherry Cohen, who got number 2, Nina Ahmad, Obona Paul Higgins. And these folks actually did better in terms of ballot position than they did previously. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not this helps them in terms of getting out of the primary and into the general election.
And, and I think there are, years ago, it did matter a lot more what your ballot position was, because there was the advertising wasn't as ubiquitous. There was no internet. Now there are different ways for candidates to get their message out there. And then there's something relatively new, and that's mail-in voting. Does mail-in voting negate the necessity to pull a good ballot number? Does that change this calculus for you?
Here's the thing. Even with mail-in voting, people have to know who you are.
Yeah.
So name recognition is important no matter whether you're voting in person or voting by mail. However, because mail-in ballots, you come home, you got the mail-in ballot, you can sit there and look at it. It's kind of it could benefit people who may not have gotten a look if someone is like rushing through the ballot in person. You can take your time. You can sit there and look and see who you want to vote for and pick that person. So, in the end, it's all about name recognition and getting your vote out, whether it's in person, online, or, via mail-in ballot. But you've got to get your people out.
And that's one of the key issues in this election, with it being so crowded for council at large. And now we're talking about the mayor's race, which is going to get majority of the attention.
Yeah, it's going to suck all the air out of the room.
Right. So if you're not an incumbent, how do you do this?
Well, it helps if you actually started planning before you started running. If I'm someone who lost a city council race, and Isaiah Thomas is possibly the best example of this. When Isaiah Thomas lost his second go around for being a city council at large person, he didn't disappear from the public eye. He kept working. He kept putting himself out there. He made sure that people saw him in the community doing things, so that when he decided to run again, he had name recognition. People were like, "Oh, Isaiah Thomas, I know who that is." And they were willing to give him a chance. people like Sherry Cohen and Nina Ahmad, you heard their names before. Rue Landau, you've heard her name before. And that's going to help them. I don't know how much it's going to help them in a 29-person field with 3 incumbents, but it's going to help them some.
And I think one of the biggest things you can have on your side on election day
Mm-hmm.
in a race where it's crowded, and we haven't even talked about judicial races yet, by the way. That'll be another night, because that's a whole other thing.
Clown car almost.
But one of the things that can help you, if there are committee people at the polling place on election day and they're handing out the palm card,
Mm-hmm.
that can make a big difference, because if people aren't sure, but they see the Democratic Party endorsement,
Right.
that helps a lot. That does help.
Right. And it also helps if you have a ground game. And we'll find out how people's ground games are when it comes to petition challenges. If you have a really, really good ground game, which got your petitions out, got them signed correctly, and everything like that, you should be okay in terms of, getting your vote out. But if you don't have as good of a ground game, if you don't have people who are knowledgeable and who can, get the vote out for you, then you're going to have an uphill climb. But you've got to have your ground game, especially now, particularly with the people who, have low ballot position. Ground game is going to be crucial.
For me, it's a red flag when candidates do not have, or they're on the edge of not having enough signatures for a petition, because that means you didn't have people working with you, or at least not enough, which means when you get to May, you're not going to have a group of volunteers.
Right.
You have to get those people early, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but if you know where to look, and you've been doing this for a while, and this is one of the other things people ask me about. I've had a lot of people say to me, in the last, let's say, 6 months, which district council members are most at risk? And I say, the ones that have a candidate that we knew about a challenger we knew about a year ago. They're the ones who have the hardest time. And there have been some challengers who have come out within the last few months, and I thought, that's really hard to do. You need to spend time in that district as a candidate. Not, you need to tell people, I'm running. I'm going to do this. And if you didn't do that, you can't make that up in just a couple of months. It's a little different at the at-large level. Not much, but it's a little more forgiving.
Right.
I think if you're running in a district seat, that's like a 3-year election for you. Like, that's a 3-year election cycle, because you have to start really early and start building up a coalition.
Yes, because you're trying to unseat an incumbent. And it is easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than it is to unseat an incumbent.
So we are almost out of time here. Denise, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
But we got to say real quick that this is part of the Lenfest Foundation's Every Voice, Every Vote effort to make sure that people understand exactly how this whole election thing works. From the important stuff to the horn and hard art can. We're trying to make sure that you understand what's going on and can, make your mayoral and council decisions accordingly.
As I told our friend Vincent Thompson, friend of the show, he was the second most important person in that room today after the coffee game. So we'd like to thank everybody for being with us. Lance Haver, our consumer reporter, thank you for your report. Denise, thank you as always. Thank you, Allison, behind the scenes. And we will be back next week with Hall Monitor.